There's a moment when the sun disappears, when darkness falls and you're left with just your fears. That's the moment you feel your first pang of doubt. That's the moment when the night comes out. When the Night Comes Out presents Redo, Part 1. Imagine a world where technology is so advanced you can download your memories, then not only relive them, but experience them differently than when it first happened. How much would you spend to live something again, only better? And how close is such technology to mind control? Hard questions asked when the night comes out. Laura Lee Bowling arrived at home a little after 9 o'clock. It had been an interminable day, but she had a lot more to go before she could rest. Get inside, she thought, as she pulled into the driveway of her modest home. 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, basement, attic, kitchen, living room, and back room behind the kitchen. It was all she needed. It didn't matter. She was gone after tonight. She had to be. Get inside, she thought. Get inside, get your stuff from the closet, get in the car. You can mail the card from the road. Then you have to get out of the country and start over. She had the passports, she had the new identity ready. She just had to get out. Thailand was the first place. Then, if she felt safe, maybe in South Africa. The car was fully gassed. She had a limited time. She had to go. Laura Lee got out of the car, got her keys, and ran for the door. She felt totally exposed, and it took her a moment to get the key into the door. She was out of breath when she got inside. Her house was too dark. The same house she had been in for 1,000 days, perhaps, seemed menacing tonight in the darkness. She flicked on the lights as she dashed to her bedroom. She stopped in the second bedroom, which was her office, and packed up the laptop in the bag. Did she put the card in here? No, it was too small. There was a chance it might get lost. Just worry about it on the road. Laura Lee ran into the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out the 2 fully packed suitcases. She next stepped into the bathroom, gathered up a few more things, managed to step them into one of the suitcases with a struggle, and zipped it closed. She had just managed it when the pounding on the door disrupted the night. Fear clutched at her. It was happening much sooner than she thought it would.
Lori!
The voice boomed from the front door. Just that one word sounded slurred or drugged.
Lori, get down here. We need to talk. God damn it, we need to talk.
She knew the voice, or thought she did. This was not what she thought they would do. She expected guys in black battering down the door. There would be a soft noise and the bullet would punch through her head. She'd be gone in an instant, her body cut up or burned, never to be found. Lori fished into her pocket and came up with the card. It was tiny, no bigger than her pinky nail. She put it in her mouth. It was the only thing she could think of. She dashed to the bathroom and took a long drink. Down it went. It would be safe there. She'd be dead soon, but the card would be there. They'd find it.
Who is it?
She called out.
You know who this is. It's Bo.
Bo? Who the fuck was Bo? Laura Lee knew this was the thing they sent to kill her, but why was it a guy named Bo pretending to know who she was?
I don't know any Bo.
There was a loud crash against the door. Jesus, had he just tried to break the damn thing down? What did she do? It was just the one guy, right? Laura Lee entered the spare bedroom again. She had a letter opener on the desk, shaped like a dagger. She grabbed this and went downstairs, studying the shape on the other side of the door through the curtained windows. He smashed the door again, and the door shook in the frame. A splinter of wood broke from the door to skitter across the floor. Laura Lee reached the door and touched the doorknob. What the hell was she doing? Run, she thought. She needed to run. Instead, she opened the door, letter opener at the ready. Beau was a sizable man with a beard and sinewy arms. In both hands, he held a sledgehammer. His clothes were wrinkled and tattered. His eyes were wild, and he looked like a man completely out of his mind. "Lori, please." He put the hammer down at his side, his eyes pleading. "Why are you doing this? Talk to me. Talk to me, please. We were so special." I don't know you." Laura Lee held the dagger out front. "Get away from here or I'll call the police." "You do know me. We were a couple, Lori. It started way back at St. Augustine's, remember? Back in junior high? We were a couple for the first time then. We said we'd be together. Always." A penny dropped in her head. Beau Needham had been a shy kid in her class way back at St. Augie's. She had spoken to him maybe 4 times the entire 2 years they were in junior high and then went to different schools. They had never been a couple. Then the second penny dropped. Laura Lee's eyes widened. "Beau," she said quietly and calmly. "Beau, listen to me. They've done something to you. They've messed with your memories, okay? Please, you have to listen to me. We were in the same class, but we were never together. You have to believe me." Beau looked confused. He shook his head and lifted one shaking hand to his head, running it through his sweaty hair. He shook it again. "No, that's not right. It's not right. We were boyfriend and girlfriend. You said it would be forever. I've been trying to reach out, Lori. I've spent a lot of time trying to find you." Probably not, she thought. They had most likely told him right where she was. How long had they been subjecting him to the treatment? "Beau, what you're remembering is wrong. We went to school together, but we weren't in love. We weren't even friends." Wrong move. Beau bared his teeth. "That's a lie!" Laura Lee raised the dagger and held up the other hand. "Beau, you need to back off. I am going to call the police. You need to back away." Instead of backing away, Beau paced back and forth, his face twisted in some kind of internal agony. He chewed at his lower lip and then smacked one hand against his head. "It's all up here," he said. "It wasn't a lie. It's not a lie. We were together. I remember it. Why can't you remember it? You were the biggest crush in my life, Lori. Why don't you remember?" "They've done something to your mind, Beau." She hoped he didn't notice she hadn't called the cops. If she closed the door, he was going to smash it down. Would she have time to get to her car, start it, and drive off? "You're the one doing something to my mind." His face was now a mask of anger. His eyes blazed. "You're lying to me and I want you to stop. Stop tormenting me. Stop it!" Laura Lee was going to try one more time to talk him down, then slam the door, but he never gave her the chance. Just as she opened her mouth, he reared back with the hammer and came at her with a scream. She ducked under the swing and jabbed with the dagger. To her surprise, the pointed blade pierced his stomach midsection, and he staggered, the breath knocked out of him. However, as he staggered, the hammer came down and clipped Laura Lee's right shoulder. There was a crunch she felt more than heard. Pain like a firework flared to her right, and she stumbled in that direction. Flares of bright white exploded in her eyes. She bumped into the sofa and stopped herself from stumbling. Where was she? What was happening? Bo staggered all the way back to the door. He looked down at his stomach, staring at the handle of the letter opener protruding there. He looked as if he was also unsure where he was. You stabbed me. He reached down and pulled the dagger out. Blood flowed like a river over his hands, then his legs. Laura Lee watched it spatter against the floor. Why did you stab me? Laura Lee stood up, but the pain in her right shoulder was so intense she nearly fell. She had no weapon now. She had to run. Laura Lee turned and ran as best she could, which was pretty poorly. She heard Bo behind her. Stop! He screamed. She made it as far as the kitchen counter. The butcher's block of knives was there, with the huge butcher knife inside. She reached out one hand as the sledgehammer came down between her shoulder blades. This time she heard the crunch from deep within her back. Everything crumbled, and she could no longer stand. Laura Lee fell face first on the kitchen floor. Nothing worked. Her legs spasmed but would not respond to her commands. Her arms moved, but in an uncoordinated way, as if all the signals from her brain were disrupted halfway to her limbs. The pain was beyond anything she could imagine. This was it. Some part of her was aware this was the end. She hoped they would find the disc she had swallowed. Laura Lee became vaguely aware Bo was approaching. Damn. Bo raised the sledgehammer, and this time it came down on her head. She had a moment where she heard her own skull crack. Then it was all black. He's standing in the old barn with his brother. They're not supposed to be in the old building because it's falling apart, but such things are irresistible to young boys. The day is hot and humid. Bees buzz in a nest in one far corner. You can jump from this part right into that old pile of hay, his brother says. It'll stop your fall, no problem. But he's not convinced, and he says so. You're just a chicken. Watch. Detective Daniel Hernan pulled up to the curb, the lights from the police cars blinding him as he did so. There were 2 ambulances and 6 police cars. Add to the scene about 20 nosy neighbors, and Dan knew this was a shitty case. When he stepped out of the car and saw the guy slumped on the front stoop, he knew for sure this was a shit assignment. A female patrolman walked over, her eyes tired and wishing they were anywhere else. Dan knew Darcy well and often met up with her for coffee before their shifts. This is a fucking mess, she confirmed. 1 dead inside, and it's a messy one. Worst I've seen yet. Then we think we got the guy who did it dead on the porch. Jesus. Can we get these neighbors back? They're a little too close for my taste. Any of them hear or see anything? Do what I can. Few of the neighbors thought they heard yelling last night, but apparently that's not uncommon here. Daniel nodded. Great. CSI already here? They're inside. Get the booties on. Daniel smiled and walked to one of the techies who knelt in front of the man collapsed on the porch. He tapped him on the shoulder and asked for gloves and booties. Daniel put on both, then asked the tech man about the man on the porch. Definitely a stab wound here. The young man pointed to a spot on the dead man's abdomen. Looks like it got him pretty good, but not before he got a last swing on the victim inside. Bled out here. Apparently just sat down and slumped over here. Daniel studied the man's face. He was calm now, his face slack. His eyes were half-lidded, but he looked asleep. His skin was pale, and his pants, the cement of the porch beneath him, and the grass were all shaded an inky color. Blood spattered his face, chest, shoulder, and neck.
"How bad is it inside?"
Daniel asked. The tech turned his head to look at him. He just shook his head. Bad. Daniel did his best to steel himself and walked into the house. There were cops and technicians all over, but also stepping around carefully. It appeared as if someone had run into the house with a paintbrush full of red paint, flinging it around randomly. Blood spattered the kitchen cabinets, the walls, the backsplash, the sofa, the floor. Daniel saw another cop he knew well and signaled to him. "Hey Tim, what we got?" "Best we can tell is the guy showed up here ranting and raving. Used this sledgehammer on her, hit her 4 times. Once got her on the shoulder, then right between the shoulder blades. Then he did her twice to the head. Not much left of her skull or features. House is in the name of Allie Bowling. She had an ID in her purse, which was nearby to confirm it. We'll get DNA and dental, too." Daniel thanked him and decided he could put it off no longer. Stepping so as not to get blood on his feet, he walked around the kitchen island. She was sprawled on the floor in front of the counter right by the fridge. At first, he only recognized the legs, body, and shoulders. Whatever was left on top of the shoulders was not recognizable as a head. Daniel studied the mass of blood, brains, and skull fragments. A few inches from the head was an eyeball. One of the final blows had scattered teeth across the floor, along with a sizable chunk of jawbone. "Christ," he said and held a hand to his mouth. Daniel had seen a lot since he became a cop. There was the time he and 2 other officers came upon a teenager who had blown off most of his head with a double-barreled shotgun. Then there was the time they had to help clean up a car accident which had turned most of those inside into jelly. Or the time when they had another car accident where one of the children in the car had been decapitated. Somehow this was worse. The setting and situation made this one more horrific. Smashed to pieces with a sledgehammer in her kitchen. This was the simple sentence which summed up the entire scene, and it was like something out of a suburban nightmare. Daniel turned away. He'd read the reports about the scene and would have to come back to study for clues, but right now he was relying on the cops who had already been here searching and the crime scene investigators. Daniel studied the living room instead. Standard stuff. However, he noticed it was also spotless. It was the living room of a person rarely at home, it seemed. Busy woman, perhaps. Someone dedicated to her job. Daniel walked around the house. No litter box or cat food, no dogs, no pets. Again, signs pointing to a woman more in love with her job than anything here. No attachments. Upstairs, he noticed the bathroom was missing any toiletries. No hairspray, not even a toothbrush. In the bedroom, he understood why. Packed suitcases, many of them. The closets were nearly empty. This was a woman leaving her house with no intention of returning. A quick check of her bags revealed a passport and tickets out of the country, Thailand. Of course, there were people who went there for vacations all the time. Not entirely weird, but given how nice and neat the house was, a woman as dedicated to her job like this was not the type to take a long vacation to Thailand. Not an easy place to work remotely or anything like that. Fleeing? What did this scene say to him? Neighbors heard shouting. A guy was here with a sledgehammer. A man was doing the shouting. Laura Lee was in the middle of packing up and leaving. She had a job she loved, but was still heading out of the country to a place that wasn't weird in an overall sense, but odd given her circumstances. She stabbed him somehow, but not fatal enough for him to die before he came back at her with the hammer. She must have been hit once in the shoulder, but then in the back. She was trying to run away, but couldn't. The blow to the back might have paralyzed her, knocked her to the ground for sure. Then he stood over her and delivered 2 more to the head. With that finished, he dropped the hammer, staggered to the porch, and sat down? Just sat down and bled to death? Initial view, this was exactly what the initial evidence seemed to indicate. What do you think? Daniel turned around to see his fellow detective, Jessica Stam. She was a redhead with a reputation for being sharp and no-nonsense. Daniel relayed everything he thought and what he had deciphered so far. She nodded. I think she was running away too, she confirmed. From what I gather, the neighbors who heard anything thought the guy was raving about being in love with her. A lover's spat? Daniel shook his head. No, it doesn't feel right. I agree. I think he was a stalker type, obsessed with her. We're gonna need to search his phone and computer. Let's check out everything about him. Already on it, Dan. I had no doubt, Jess. They smiled. She might have intimidated some other guys on the force, but Daniel had always enjoyed working with Jessica. They had an easy banter, and he liked her straight-to-the-point approach. He had little patience for bullshit. I guess I'd better get in the game here and start talking to neighbors, Daniel said. I'm gonna tell Mom if you do, he says. His brother punches him in the shoulder. Say that again and I'll hit you even harder. Look at the rope. It's fine. Just swing out and let go. It's easy. I don't think we should do it, and I don't think you should either. It looks dangerous. We're not even up that high, you baby. Yeah, huh? We gotta be 100 feet off the ground up here. You'll break your legs or something. You just watch. I heard some guy yelling, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. We get people yelling around here sometimes. Kids, you know. I thought I heard the guy screaming about how he was in love with her. I don't know. I never really talked to her before. She was never home. I heard a lot of banging. I guess he was banging on the door or something. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't even know anyone lived in the place. I never saw a woman there at all. I guess she was working or something. I slept the whole time. I heard nothing. He sounded like a psycho. Screaming like that? I thought I heard him yelling about being in love or something. I don't know. People are crazy. Daniel spent quite a bit of time talking to the neighbors. He didn't end up with much. Lots of people heard things, but no one was sure what, or who the woman was. Apparently, Laura Lee Bowling did not spend much time socializing with the neighbors. Workaholic. Got it, he thought. Did that lead him to anything which might seal up this case? Later, as the sun really began to rise in the sky and the heat started, Daniel met up with Jessica back at the station. The team was cleaning up the scene as best they could. More teams would go over the house. The bodies would be autopsied with toxicology reports. Jessica sat down and ran her hands through her hair, which she had let down before entering the room. The neighbors were not very helpful, were they? She asked. No, not at all. They heard something, they heard nothing. No one seemed to have talked to her before any of this. What's that say to you? Laura Lee was a woman dedicated to her work. I guess we can check to see if she had a significant other somewhere else, but do you look at the house? The living room looked more like a museum piece than any place someone lived in. Jessica nodded. I agree. No one knew anything about her social life. I ran into a few neighbors who thought the house was empty. We need to dig into this guy's background. Did they get a name? Bo Needham. We're running the background checks on him now. Should be ready soon. Think we've got a guy who just snapped? Daniel asked. Thought there was something between them, but there wasn't? No clue. Maybe. From what he was shouting, he certainly seemed convinced they were a couple. Given what we know about her schedule, when would she have time for dating? Jessica wagged a finger at him. You're jumping to conclusions. We need to check her background, too. Was she working all the time? We don't know they weren't an item at some point. I got some information about her from one of the patrolmen. She worked for Gentech. Jessica's eyes widened. Gentech? You're kidding. The guys who make Redo? One and only. No idea what she did, but she was an employee. Jessica whistled. I bet she got paid well. Can you believe the amount that company makes with that crazy headset thing? Billions. It helps when it's so expensive only the filthy rich can afford it. Plus, I hear rumors it's addictive. Jessica laughed. Let's see, a tool you can use to download your memories, then relive one of your favorites with full interaction? Did you miss the big catch in the football game? Relive it with Redo and catch the goddamn thing. How could that possibly be addictive? They shared another laugh. Of course, the company denied there was any addictive property, but there had been photos leaked of the richest of the rich zoned out in their homes having Redo parties. A dozen of the wealthiest sons of bitches in the world, headsets and goggles on, mouths open, lost in their memories. Trying to change those memories so they could actually have the courage to ask out the homecoming queen this time around. Rumor was, some began to lose the line between memories fed to their brain from a computer and the real-life stuff that actually happened. You don't think this Beau guy could have afforded Redo? Daniel asked, his eyebrow raised. You think in Redo psychosis? I can't see how, unless he got one of those second-hand jobs, but they leave telltale bruises on the head. However, it's worth looking into. I hear those knockoffs can really be dangerous. Guess we're gonna have to make a trip down to Redo offices. Daniel smiled. I think we should do that together. Always wanted to go. Jessica winked. I hear they have flavored water in the drinking fountains, massage chairs, all kinds of stuff. Hot and cold running beer out of the taps, who knows? But I kind of want to see it for myself. Let's set up the appointment. I'm going to start making calls here. I'll let you know when I'm headed out for interviews. You want to take Beau and I take Lori? Works for me. Daniel agreed. Time to get to work. Daniel and Jessica looked at the reports spread out across the table with tired eyes. They had taken over a conference room, declaring it was their room for the investigation. They puzzled over the reports from the patrol officers and other detectives. A narrative had been born and was already being pushed as the correct one. Beau Needham was mentally ill and probably off his meds. There were pill bottles in his apartment which were not as empty as they should have been. His roommate claimed he could tell Beau was spiraling, but couldn't stop him. The man also claimed Beau had started ranting about a girl he had dated in junior high. A girl he called Lori, whom he had apparently dated back then, hot and heavy. Beau was sure she was reaching out to him and wanted to be with him. So he snaps and shows up at her place with a sledgehammer. Jessica rubbed her eyes and tossed the report down on the table. That's the narrative everyone wants us to believe. Daniel yawned and stretched. Boss man told me today he hoped we could wrap this up in a few days. It all feels wrong. Daniel sighed and got up to pace around. Agreed. I still think something happened at Gentech. Even though we have no evidence. I have my gut. Which does nothing to make an arrest. Daniel turned his head to stare at her. We need to get into Gentech and rattle some branches. 3 days later, the two detectives stood in the marble-floored lobby of Gentech, home of Redo. The building was the tallest in the city, with an odd twisting shape that gave it the nickname the Unicorn Horn or just the Horn. It shone in the sunlight, making its top spire visible for up to 100 miles on cloudless days. It was all glass, with nary an unpleasant view from any office in the place. "Hello, detectives," said a small man with neat, inky hair and thick black glasses. My name is Eric Newman. I'm the communications director. We were here to see Del Lord, Daniel said. We were told we'd be able to talk to him. Well, Mr. Lord is a very busy man. He had other tasks to attend to. Plus, Miss Bowling worked in my department. He thought it would be better I answer any of your questions about her. Daniel and Jessica exchanged looks. Already the corporate runaround, and they had barely set foot in the place. Daniel shrugged. This guy would have to do, and if they needed Lord, they'd try to get a judge to compel the man to talk. Fine, Jessica said. Is there a place we can talk? We'd also like to see your desk. We can head upstairs. There's a conference room, and we've left her cubicle as it was. Eric led the way, and the detectives followed. At least it was nice and cool in the Horn. In the prior 3 days, both detectives had started to assemble pieces of the puzzle, but they were still waiting on autopsy and toxicology reports. Laura Lee Bowling had worked at Gentech in the marketing and communications department for 7 years. By all accounts, she had been a dedicated employee, often working late, traveling for work quite a bit, and rising up the corporate ladder. There was nothing in her past indicating anything untoward. She had a few parking tickets, all of them paid. Thus was the end of the nefarious activities of one Laura Lee Bowling. She had no pets. Lori had the house in the suburbs, but often slept at hotels downtown to be at work early the next day. She had no boyfriend that any of her family or friends knew about. No one knew why Bo Needham would feel they were a couple. As for Bo, it turned out he went to the same junior high with Lori. They had been in the same classes, but his family said he never had a serious girlfriend, and definitely not with Lori or anyone else in junior high. Bo had mental problems. He suffered from depression as soon as puberty hit and was treated for bipolar disorders. When he was on his meds, he could hold down jobs, but most of them were labor-intensive gigs working at warehouses or construction sites. The problem was he often went off his meds, so holding down a job for anything longer than a year was hard. Poor Bo, like so many others with mental illness, soon descended into drug use and a constant string of going into and out of therapy. His sister assumed he was on his meds now and had been happy, but she had also lost track of him a few weeks ago, maybe a month. Had he ever had a redo session? She laughed. There was no way her brother, on his own, could afford even a street-level session. Frustrating. There seemed to be no reason for Bo to be at Laura Lee's door the night he showed up and killed her. He was unstable, but had never been dangerous before. Perhaps to himself, but not others. Jessica, Daniel, and Eric reached their floor. The scenery out the window was spectacular. Daniel always had a thing for tall buildings, and it was hard to focus on the task at hand when you could see all across downtown into the suburbs. They took a seat in a compact conference room, and Dan sat with his back to the window. Jessica sat to his left, and Newman sat at the far end of the table, as if sitting so far away would be easier when it came time for him to dash. "Can you tell us what Laura Lee was working on?" Jessica started, still getting a notepad and pen out. "She was working on marketing redo," Eric replied. "I mean, she worked in the key accounts department, so with some bigger companies around the world. They offer redo sessions and tools for their top execs. It's thought dealing with past memories positively can help people be better managers." Daniel furrowed his brow. "How so?" Eric extended his hands to the side like the wings of a frightened dove. "Well, there can be things which hold a person back when they're trying to succeed. Past failures, which can be triggered with increased accountability and responsibility. Redo helps them get over that. There's been a lot of demonstrated therapeutic work done with Redo." "Interesting. You'd think something so valuable would be made cheaper so the rest of the world could use it," Daniel remarked. Eric's face turned an interesting shade of pink. but we're working hard to bring down the costs of our interface equipment. However, to do what we do takes a tremendous amount of technology, and that tech does not come cheap. We are working to make our product more accessible for therapy purposes, however. Maybe have it be something covered by insurance. Daniel held up his hand as if warding off an onslaught. Apologies, Mr. Newman. Can't help being a smartass sometimes. Did she have access to new technologies or sensitive documents? Eric looked puzzled. I'm not aware of anything. I mean, she might have seen or heard a few things about upgrades or new versions of the Redo headset, but nothing big. We all sign NDAs here, so she wouldn't have been able to tell anyone about it without repercussions. Like ending up dead? Jessica inserted that barb and raised one eyebrow. Eric stammered. I'm sorry, but I must be misunderstanding something. I thought it was proven Laura Lee was killed by some psycho stalker, someone she had a relationship with in the past. Are you trying to imply she was killed by, by the company? He let out several high-pitched breaths, which Daniel realized was him laughing. Sweat beaded across the man's forehead. We don't know what the reason was at this point. There is a lot we're investigating, and nothing is off the table. Daniel said this with an even tone and a straight face. He was actually enjoying making this man sweat. But I can assure you this company had nothing to do with it. From what I can tell, and from my own personal experience, Laura Lee was loved by her coworkers. I know I thought of her as totally reliable. She was always willing to put in extra hours and work hard. We will miss her. What sort of relationships did she have with coworkers? Daniel asked. Were there office romances? Did she have a best friend? A group she hung out with? Eric shrugged, then wiped at his forehead. I don't know. I don't hang out with the people who report to me, to be honest. I saw her with some of the women on the floor. We have a strict policy of no romances here at the office, and had never been aware of anything with her. You mentioned how Gentech is researching using Redo for therapy purposes. Jessica chewed on the end of her pen. Have you already been doing testing of that sort of thing in hospitals or with psychiatrists? Eric cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. I wouldn't know. That would be research and development. I see. Daniel replied, making a note. Can we talk to them? I'll have to check with legal. There's a lot in there we don't want people to see just yet. Jessica looked at Daniel and mouthed, I bet. Were you aware of anyone here at the company who might have had a grudge against Laura Lee? Daniel asked. Eric cleared his throat again. Not that I'm aware of, no. Again, I don't see how anyone here would have anything to do with this man who killed her. Don't worry about it. Jessica sighed and closed her notebook. This was not getting results. You don't have to see the connections, we do. Are you aware of the street version of Redo? Copies? Do you know how dangerous they are, or is that not really a thing? Eric once again looked flustered. Those are cheap knockoffs. Redo is a top-class product which should be used under very specific situations. Our product is government regulated, you know. Those street versions could cause physical or mental damage, things which are not a problem for our product. What about Redo psychosis? Daniel asked. There is no evidence of any such thing, and our company is working hard with government regulators to ensure our product is safe. Redo is just a way to revisit memories, but with an interactive component. It's like virtual reality games of decades past, but with a more personalized approach. It's harmless. Daniel and Jessica looked at each other. Was there any point in going on with this? The guy was a company mouthpiece, and they would not get anything but the standard company line out of him. She gave a very subtle shake of her head. Thank you for your time, Mr. Newman, Daniel said, closing up his notebook. We'd really like to take a look at Laura Lee's desk. Newman looked relieved. He stood up, shook their hands, then gestured toward the door. 2 minutes later, both of them were in Laura Lee's cubicle. It was the cubicle of someone dedicated to their job. There were folders, papers, and pictures all over. Photos of babies neither detective knew, and family members they had not yet spoken to. There were some vacation images, but not many. There were more charts, calendars, and other things related to work all over. A plastic plant stood in a plastic pot on top of the cubicle wall. A desk lamp covered in Post-it notes took up one side of the desk. It would take our CSI team 3 days to look through this, Jessica stated. What are we looking for? Let's see if she had a date book or one of those planners. Daniel was already shuffling through papers. It's going to take a warrant to get voicemails or things off her computer. Provided they haven't already deleted everything. Daniel had no response to that. He found what appeared to be a planner, stuffed with more tabs and Post-its peeking out of the pages. There was also a desktop calendar, which Jessica freed from the pens, staplers, and other papers. As they tucked them away in their bags, one of the other employees approached. She was a small woman with glasses, her hair done in a bun, complete with a pencil stuck through it. She looked nervous. "Are you guys cops?" she asked. Jessica glanced at Daniel, but turned on her warmest smile. "We're detectives, yes. We're just looking for some things which might give us insight into what happened to Laura Lee. You are?" Well, my name is Laura," she said. "Laura Jensen. I worked with Lori quite a bit. I guess we could be called friends. We ate lunch together a lot." "I see," Daniel replied. "Do you know if Lori was romantically involved with anyone?" Laura looked even more nervous. Her eyes darted around. "Well, not really. I heard she had a few affairs with guys here in the office. However, I don't think she was seeing anyone when she... Unable to complete the sentence, Laura shrugged and wiped at her eyes. "Do you know what she was working on?" Jessica asked. "Anything new? Had she been working on any new projects lately?" "Not that I know of. We were both working on marketing campaigns for the new iteration of Redo. A whole social media campaign combined with print and some webinars. We were both reaching out to influencers to promote it." "Did she talk to you about what she was working on or tell you anything?" Daniel asked. Laura shrugged. "I don't know. I mean, she didn't have much of a social life. She worked late and got here early. She even had an apartment she rented down here and spent most nights there." "Was there anything going on in her life she was worried about?" Jessica asked. "Anything which might have indicated she was in trouble? Leave nothing out either, even if it just seems weird or crazy." Laura shrugged again, her hands ringing against each other. "Well, she told me she had gotten a few phone calls recently. Weird ones, where the people on the other side hung up instead of spoke. Occasionally, the other person would breathe heavy into the phone, but not saying anything." "Good to know." Daniel made a mental note for phone records. They would need them from the office, too. Emails as well. "I'm very sorry about what happened to your friend," Jessica said as she put a hand on Laura's arm. "We're going to do what we can to find out why this happened." "Thank you," Laura replied, but then she wiped at her eyes. She looked around once more and dashed back to her own cubicle. Daniel and Jessica carried their newly gotten gains and headed for the door. They could feel the eyes of everyone else staring at them. Just as they reached the door which would lead to the elevators, a voice cut through the silence. Loud, gregarious, and familiar, even with just the few words spoken. "Detectives, I am so sorry to be so late." Daniel and Jessica once again glanced at each other. Jessica mouthed, "Oh shit," as they both rotated on their heels toward the sound of the voice. Del Lord strode across the office, looking as handsome as always. The world considered the man a genius at both technology and business. He wore a smart blue suit, his hair done perfectly, with the part down the left side. He had perfectly straight, perfectly white teeth, which beamed at them right now. Halfway to where the two detectives stood, he already had his hand out. He shook Daniel's hand first, then Jessica's. "It is a pleasure to meet you. Oh, I wish it was under better circumstances. I apologize for not being here on time, but I had a meeting I just could not remove myself from. That's the problem with being an international company. You sometimes end up on calls overseas in different time zones. Would you like to speak now? Do you have time?" Daniel smiled back. "I think we can make time. It's not often we get the chance to talk to one of the most eligible bachelors in the city." Del laughed. "Oh, you can take none of that stuff seriously. Detectives, it would be my pleasure to speak about this. I might shed some light on whatever it was Miss Bowling was working on and help answer some questions about Gentech." Del led the way to a private elevator at the far end of the hallway. He waved his hand in front of a glass panel. The door opened, and he held it for the detectives. They rose to the top of the spire in silence. The entire trip took seconds. The door opened on a vast office, taking up the entire floor. At one end, against a bank of windows, was an enormous desk. Monitors ringed the entire front end of the desk, and there were more on the walls. Each of them was tuned to a newscast or a stock market ticker. There was a gigantic leather sofa about 3 feet in front of the desk. With a gesture, Del indicated where the detectives were to sit, and they sat down. Del strolled effortlessly around the back of the desk and, with a smile on his face, sat down in the large leather chair. He sat back, adjusting his suit coat. "Now, let me start out by saying that I am appalled at what happened to Miss Bowling. It's a tragedy for her and her family. I have reached out to her parents and extended my sympathies already. I cannot imagine the horror of this situation. It's almost unbearable. Gentech mourns with them." Jessica and Daniel let him ramble. They held their own smiles on their faces as he spoke, waiting patiently for him to stop. "Thank you for that, but we're not the press." Daniel calmly removed his notepad again, opened it, and leveled his gaze. "Now, can you tell us what Miss Bowling was working on? No one seems to have any details." Del shrugged. "She worked in marketing. She was helping market the Redo tools and platform. You know, we are one of the hottest-selling technological devices on the market, right? We've sold hundreds of thousands of the units, and our newest iteration is already pre-selling like never before." Jessica kept her smile as if she had painted it on. "Great, but we're not asking about that. Did she have access to things which could have been controversial, or would she have seen anything she shouldn't?" Del's smile faltered. "Why would she have access to anything like that? No, she might have seen some of the new product specs ahead of the average person, but she was not in research and development." "Do you know if she had enemies here at Gentech?" Daniel asked. Del shrugged. "Not that I was ever made aware of." "Did you have any sort of personal relationship with Miss Bowling?" Jessica asked. Del cleared his throat and shifted in his chair. "Well, I was her boss, I guess. I mean, I'm the CEO, so everyone in this building is a potential direct report for me. I spoke to her at a few company functions. I remember talking to her during a Christmas party one year. I'm a bit confused. I thought it had been determined this was a crazy person who did this to her, someone she had a relationship with in the past." "We aren't sure how true that is," Daniel assured him. "We're checking every angle." Well, I heard the man who did this was found dead at the scene. He certainly was not a Gentech employee, so you'll forgive me if I'm a bit puzzled as to what this has to do with Gentech or Redo. Can you tell us more about how Redo works? Jessica asked. Dell smiled again, now back in familiar territory. You haven't tried it? We live on a cop's salary, Mr. Lord. Redo is out of our price range. Dell laughed. I should send you each a unit. You'll love it. Jessica held up a hand. No need for that, but can you give us a bird's-eye level explanation? I'm sure you're familiar with virtual reality, he began. This is a higher form of that. While VR created an entirely digital environment, Redo is a tremendous step forward. We can download memories to a computer. A person thinks about a particularly powerful memory during the process. For the full experience, a trained technician should guide them through this. But the individual unit can also do this on its own, and our newer models will allow people to undergo the process at home. He paused to let this all sink in. This was all very rehearsed, Daniel thought to himself. He gave a slight twitch of his little finger towards Jessica. She responded with a finger twitch of her own. Once it's downloaded, you can then use the goggles and earpiece to live through that memory. Just like VR, it's totally interactive. So if you picked a memory you always wish you could have changed, you can now do something differently. You can see what would happen if you had asked that cheerleader to homecoming or made the touchdown pass. But it doesn't actually change anything in real life, Daniel added. Dell laughed. I wish the tech were that powerful. No, we still haven't yet invented something which can alter reality or change history. This is just a trip through memory lane with a chance to try something else. Most people find just doing that is very liberating and exciting. Daniel nodded, thinking, chewing his pen. Can someone else outside of the person experiencing the memory access the playback, if you will? Dell looked puzzled. You mean hack a Redo session? No, not possible. Are you sure? Jessica added. Dell looked insulted by the mere insinuation. We have all the highest safety protocols in place. Why would anyone want to do that? Could someone implant an idea or alter a memory from outside? Perhaps convince someone of something using Redo, maybe without even the person knowing it was happening? Daniel held his gaze, waiting for the reply to this one. Before they came into the building, Jessica and Daniel had pooled their notes, and both agreed they had a hunch this had to do with Redo in some way. Nothing about the story presented as reality made any sense. I don't see how it's possible. Not with a fully authorized Redo headset. What about the knockoffs? Jessica asked. What about them? I cannot say anything about the people who try to steal our designs. We take quick legal action as soon as we're made aware of any counterfeit Redo hardware. Gentech does not authorize these, and we think they have the potential of being dangerous. Are you doing anything to get them off the streets? Jessica followed. Dell's smile remained, but his voice was cold. That's what the police are for. We funded them via our donations, and if we learn of an illegal operation, we turn them in. You don't handle them on your own? Daniel inquired. I don't have my own personal army, Detective. We bring lawsuits when we have to, but making counterfeit devices is illegal, so we turn them over to the police. Daniel nodded. He jotted in his notebook as if taking down something important. In fact, he had started a tally of every tell from Lord that he was lying. A glance to the left there, blinking here, adjusting suit coat there, hand wringing here. Would it be possible for a redo operator to steal information from someone using the device? He asked. The only secrets an operator could take from a customer would be whatever the customer gave them. The user gives information, and the AI of Redo creates the environment. Could an operator... How do I phrase this? Jessica chewed on her pen for a moment. Could someone put an idea into a user's head? Dell swallowed hard. Daniel made a quick tick mark. You mean implant images? Something like that movie, what was it, from all those years ago, where a bunch of people plant an idea in someone's dreams? This is virtual reality, detective. You could no more get someone to do something they weren't already inclined to do than you would try to hypnotize someone into committing murder. The mind doesn't work that way. It's much stronger than you think. What if it's not? Jessica asked. What do you mean? She means, what if you were to mess around with a mentally disturbed person's mind? Daniel added. Could you take someone with a history of mental illness, mess with their memories, and essentially weaponize them? I'm not sure I like the term weaponize, but I suppose it might be technically possible to mess around with a mentally ill person using a street-level Redo knockoff and create a potentially dangerous situation. Therefore, we don't endorse the knockoffs, and it's why we put people through a mental health screening before they use Redo. Daniel cast his eyes sideways to Jessica. She gave him a quick wink. They had a lot more questions, but could tell Lord was starting to get on edge. It wouldn't be much longer before he either kicked them out or insisted he couldn't answer more questions without a lawyer present. It was time to head out. Thank you for talking to us, Mr. Lord, Jessica said, standing up and extending her hand. Lord did his best to hold on to a smile, but blinked in rapid succession. He stood up, adjusted his suit, and shook her hand. Daniel extended his as well. If we have more questions, can we get in touch with you? Daniel asked. Lord nodded. You can contact my assistant. I'd be glad to help. Again, I really am sorry this happened to Miss Bowling. This is a tragedy all the way around. Yes, it is. Thank you again. They hustled to the elevator as quickly as they could. Once they hit the outside air, both of them let out a loud breath and laughed. Wow, Jessica said. I know, Jesus. You'd think a guy like that would be better at lying. Did you notice all of his tells? Jessica imitated him as she read off her list. Looking up to the left, the blinking and fidgeting, the thing he kept doing with his suit coat and lapels. A guy like that must get so used to people agreeing with him and doing what he says without question, he forgets how to fib. They made their way to the car, and Daniel started the engine. Then he sat back, sighing. Well, what do we think? He asked. I think he's lying. The thing I'm still not sure about is if he's lying about knowing who killed her, or just hiding something she saw. I mean, what if she saw something there, and someone else within the company had her killed? Would he know about the first part, or the second, or just not want anyone to know what she found out? I have this feeling he knows more about what happened. I mean, the scenario we're supposed to believe is some guy she barely knew in 8th grade, 40 years later decided he was in love with her and killed her. It makes no sense. What would set him off? No reunions and no contact between the two we can find. Jessica confirmed, rooting through her notes. Just then, both their phones vibrated. Daniel glanced down. Think we need to go visit our friend at the morgue, Daniel said. He's got results already. I think the bottle of scotch I gave him helped. Bribery'll get you everywhere. They pulled out of the parking space, each of them making a mental note they would be back here more than likely. Something was happening within the glass walls of the Horn and within Gentech. They just didn't know what. Reuben Fagan was the medical examiner Daniel and Jessica had to deal with. He was an older man, in his 50s, and wore wire-rimmed glasses, stood all of 5'5", but had been in the business for so long, helped provide assistance for so many crimes, he seemed a lot bigger. He knew everything there was to know about people and what could kill them, but he was also beloved by cops for being approachable. They also knew him to love scotch. It was well known among the detectives that a bottle or case of expensive stuff could really help move your particular needs along. The detectives arrived 20 minutes after leaving Gentech. They were both tired, talking little on the ride over. Jessica even dozed off a bit against the glass of her passenger door.
"We're here,"
Daniel announced, nudging her awake as he turned off the engine. They got out and were inside moments later. Fagan met them at the door of his office, then led them to the autopsy room.
"Thank you for coming as fast as you did. How was your trip to Gentech?"
"Not bad. We got to talk to the big man himself." Daniel sat down on one of the rolling desk chairs Fagan kept around the room.
"Wow, you got to talk to Mr. Lord, huh? How special you must feel. You know, I sometimes wonder if he gave himself that last name. He thinks he should be a lord."
Jessica laughed, then yawned.
"So, what do you have for us?" "Thanks to the uniqueness of this case, and the generous gift from Daniel, I decided to do both of these right away. I found some interesting things. Daniel, let's start with your case first, Mr. Needham."
Fagan produced a folder from his desk, then waved both of the detectives over to the table. Both of them knew Fagan had cut a giant Y-shaped cut into the man's body and removed all of his insides. However, the examiner had politely pulled a sheet over the body, right up to the chin, hiding the wound.
"He was definitely killed from the stab wound," Fagan said. "I don't think you had any doubts about that. However, there were no drugs in his system of a narcotic variety. He was apparently on several antipsychotics, but he was not on anything else that night. The letter opener got him right in the abdomen and into his liver, but also tore up other things. He bled internally."
Fagan looked up at both of the detectives to ensure they were paying attention.
"This is where things get interesting. Look at his head."
Fagan put the folder down on the metal table next to the body and tilted the head so they could see. He pointed along Needham's head, across his temple area.
"You can just make out the faint bruises left here. I think he was having redo sessions, but probably from some street-level knockoffs. Either that or he was somehow accessing the top-quality stuff, but having so many sessions they left bruises. I did some scans of his body and looked at his brain. There's damage to the skull and brain tissue. He had brain damage, essentially."
"Does excessive use of redo cause that?" Daniel asked.
"Oh, definitely. Of course, the company spends a ton of money keeping it all hush-hush, but the number of times guys like me are finding people dead with brain damage like this is growing. God help us if those fucking redo helmets are made cheaper or become available to more people. I hear they want to put them in hospitals to deal with mental health problems. Ooh, I hope not."
"Could the damage caused by the redo have caused him to murder Bolin?" Jessica asked.
"Well, it might have. I mean, I'd need to know what memory he was reliving. If he was reliving his desire to date Miss Bolin in some way, given his mental health and the shakiness of the knockoff redo equipment, there might be some connection. At the very least, someone with the mental health issues Mr. Needham had could have been guided or pushed into believing something, and this could have let his delusion send him to her house. As for the murder part, well, I don't know."
"Anything else?" Daniel asked.
"Other than that, he was relatively healthy. I mean, he's a little underweight, but not sick. All of his problems appear to be in his head, and I extend that even into the physical stuff. The bruising and damage to his brain are pretty extensive. He was either showing signs of extensive use of the device or very long and intensive sessions.
Damn it,
Daniel said. What about Miss Bowling? Fagin picked up his folder and walked to the metal table next to Needham's resting place. He flipped the folder open and studied his notes. This body was covered entirely. Prepare yourself, Fagin warned. He pulled the sheet back, and the horror of what happened to Laura Lee Bowling made both detectives gasp. Her skull was just shattered. There was little left resembling a human being. I think you can tell what killed her, Fagin stated. Her skull was destroyed. There was little left inside of it. She had broken bones up and down her body. The hammer destroyed her. Fagin lifted something out of the folder in his hands. It took Daniel a moment to realize it was a small plastic bag. It reflected the overhead light. I found this in her stomach. Well, to be honest, it wasn't even all the way into her stomach yet. Stuck in the esophagus. She must have swallowed it right before Needham broke in and killed her. Daniel and Jessica moved closer. What the hell is that? Jessica asked. Looks like some kind of SIM card or a very tiny memory card, he said. It should still function. As I said, it didn't make it to the stomach, so it's still intact. Daniel peered at the small square of plastic. Was this forced down her throat? Fagin shook his head. I think she swallowed it. Swallowed it? Jessica asked. Why? Wouldn't it have been destroyed in her stomach? Daniel sighed. Not if she knew she was about to die. Jessica looked horrified. You think she did this just as Needham showed up at her house? Daniel nodded. Yeah, but think about it. She had it with her and was prepared to do this. What if she knew she had something so powerful she was prepared to swallow the damn thing in case she was killed? Jessica gave him a half smile. Now that seems like a bit of a stretch. I agree with him, Fagin interjected. Just a feeling, though. I'm supposed to be the scientist. However, she had this with her. She knew what was on it. From the reports I've seen from the crime scene, she appeared to be preparing to leave town. The suitcases were half-packed. She had nothing at the house like food that could spoil. She was going to run. She had plans to take this memory chip and get it to someone, perhaps, but Laura Lee was heading out of town. Despite her plans, she knew something bad might happen. Laura Lee swallowed this when Needham started pounding on her door. Jessica studied both men's faces. You think she knew, once Needham started on the door, this was it? You realize what you're implying? Daniel rubbed his eyes. Man, he needed a nap. Or a drink. They sent Needham to kill her for what she has on this disc. That puts things back on Gentech, Jessica concluded. We better figure out what's on here and what it means for the company, Daniel said. Thanks, Fagin. You get an entire case of scotch this time. Make it the good stuff, detective. I think I earned it. Technology can be amazing, except there will always be the people who want to misuse it. Such nefariousness can lead to death when the night comes out. You've been listening to When the Night Comes Out, a weekly horror anthology podcast with stories by Brian W. Alaspa and narrated by Allie James. Music by Kevin MacLeod. For Brian's work, visit his website at brianwalaspa.com or visit amazon.com for his books of fiction and nonfiction. Be sure to listen to Allie's work on Facebook at Allie James Projects. Visit our website at whenthenightcomesout.com to learn how to support us on Patreon.